Hey everybody. So today I wanted to talk about some debugging techniques that revolve around some experience I had with this tournament, which is the Double Cup. So if you're not familiar with what this tournament is, it's basically a tournament of many different maps, which all start with either 2 town centers or 3 town centers. So as far as the map pack goes, we can see a list of the maps here. We can see that there are 40 maps total, and 32 of them are going to be put in a map pack for the game to randomly select one to play. Now, in terms of the maps themselves, these come in a really great variety. So we have maps that have been around for decades, and then some that are brand new. We have some maps that were made by veteran scripters and some which were made by complete newbies. And all these numerous scripters will all have their own styles of scripting, and those maps that have been around for a long time will probably have had many people in and out of them and before they arrived here. So, all that taken into consideration, it's not very realistic to expect that when we take all of these and put them together in the same map script, they will all work together harmoniously. Let me try and get a little more specific with what I'm trying to get at here. So instead of considering all 32 maps at the same time, we're going to limit our selection here to just 2 maps, and those maps are going to be Karst and Precipice. So we will take a look at these maps individually first. So if we go into our game here, we can see that Karst looks like this, and that Precipice looks like this. So let's just take a look at the code for Karst for a minute. So if we're looking at this map, we can see that for the most part, all the syntax is very proper. And let's consider at the end, let's look at this here. We have a case at the end of the objects section for regicide. So if it's regicide, it'll generate these objects, otherwise it won't. Now let's just say, for example, that we forgot to close this if branch by removing this end if here. Let's save this map and see what happens. So we'll generate this map. We'll generate the exact same seed of this map. And we'll see that despite the fact that we have errors in our code, the map generates exactly the same, the way it's supposed to. So this is one of the ways by which we can go about generating maps, assuming that since they look proper, that everything's okay with them and they're all going to, work out just fine. But we will see in a minute that if we try to put these two together in a map pack, using a map that has an error such as that would end up causing issues. So here we have the maps loaded into the Madlands map pack manager. And to put these two together in a map pack, all I have to do is click this generate map pack button, and it would copy those 2 files. And in order to test this, we can use this new feature to copy the map pack range so we don't have to go into the editor and select it manually. So we'll copy the map pack range and then go into a test script to see what we can find. So we'll go back into the game and go back to random map, and we'll test the map pack that we just created. So we can see in some situations it's generating the map Karst, but we can see it's also generating just blank maps. For example, this. And that's because since we removed that end if that would end the regicide if branch in our first map, which was over here. So the rest of the code after this point is still technically within this regicide branch. And since, of course, we're not enabling regicide when we're generating the map, it's going to basically skip all this and generate nothing when we would want it to generate our second map, which is Precipice. So just to show that a bit more clearly, if I wanted to generate Precipice all the time, we would expect it to generate absolutely nothing, because technically it's still in that regicide case because we forgot to close that if branch. And if we go back and fix that, by putting that end if back in, we should be able to see that it was able to successfully generate the map that we intended. So basically from this, what I'm trying to get at is that even though our maps may look proper when we're generating them individually, they still may contain errors that can lead to bigger problems when we try to put them together in the same script. So we just did this with 2 maps. So if we expand that and consider all 32 at the same time, we would expect there to be a few more problems. But we can certainly try to generate this and see what we can find. So we'll, in a similar fashion, generate the map pack. And we will copy it over to the test script. So instead of generating 2 maps, we'll generate all 32, and we'll see what that does for us. And as we can see, indeed, there are errors with this map pack, errors that are severe enough to even crash the game. So obviously there are errors here, and we need to figure out how to fix them. So when we're searching our maps for errors, we gotta think about the fact that we have 32 maps in here, and it's pretty likely that most of them are going to be just fine, and they're not going to be causing us any problems. It's just maybe a couple in here that will be causing us problems, and we need to figure out which ones. Now, how to do that is kind of the question here, because there's 32 maps here. It would be kind of a pain to go through the code of each one of these individually to try and figure out where the issues are. And then even if we have them all put together in the same script, we still have over 28,000 lines of code to comb through in order to look for errors. So it would be really nice to have a more efficient way to figure out what's wrong with this, and luckily we do have a way. So typically the coding environment that I use to make random maps is, as we can see up here, Notepad++ with some syntax highlighting enabled. But there is another coding environment that can be even more useful, which is Visual Studio Code, and I'll provide a link to this in the description. So in Visual Studio Code, we will open up our test script, and notably, we will have to enable a certain extension. So if we go into the extensions here, we need to make sure we have AOE2 RMS check installed. That's by ANDA. So if you search for that and install that, we can see that it can highlight syntax just like Notepad++ can. But additionally, if we look at the bottom here, we can see that it can actually highlight and point out the problems that we have. So if it finds an error, we can click on that and jump to that place in the code. And we can see in here where we have an attribute that says min distance to other zones, that's not a valid attribute. It's supposed to be max distance to other zones. And so we fixed the problem here. And we can go over to the next problem just by clicking it there. And we can see that there was a space missing between this argument and the next comment. So we fixed that there. And then the next issue we're faced with is that place on forested zone is not supposed to have an argument. So we'll remove that argument and we fix that error. So, as we may imagine, this coding environment can be very useful in terms of finding and fixing errors that may be in our maps. So a couple of things to know about RMS check is that it has 2 different types of errors. So we have errors here which are highlighted in red, underlined in red, and then errors here which are underlined in yellowish orange. So the red errors are typically more serious and can lead to bigger problems, and the yellow errors are typically less serious and will probably lead to less problems, but it highlights both just to be sure. And then additionally, since RMS check is still a beta, it's not always up to date with the current DE parameters. For example, it doesn't recognize that circle radius is able to accept 2 arguments, so it will falsely highlight the second argument even though it's perfectly legal syntax. But that aside, we can go through this list and we can go through our errors and problems and fix them. And let's just say that we did all that to arrive at this, which is the DC map pack, where at this point we know that all the issues it's pointing out is stuff that we know is already legal syntax. For example, this second argument to circle radius. So even if RMS check is not highlighting any errors, so to speak, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of the maps are going to work as intended now. Because depending on the map, it may have been the case that a certain map only worked because of an error, and since we've gone through and then fixed all the errors, that it doesn't work as intended anymore. So that being said, it's always important to go through and check after we've made edits to make sure that all the maps are working as intended. Now, there's still 32 maps in here, and we've changed quite a few of them, so we still need to come up with an efficient way to go through all of these, generate them, and make sure they're working as intended. So another new feature of the Madlands Map Pack Manager is that it can put a map pack into debug mode. So that's what the Map Pack Manager does automatically. What we're seeing here was made with an earlier version, so it doesn't quite have that functionality built in yet, but we can put it in. So basically, if debug and then otherwise do this. So basically what the debug mode is for targeting a specific map within a map pack to generate so we can check to see how it looks. So if we were to put a line up at the top that says define debug, then it would run this line of code. Otherwise, it would randomly select. So if I want to test the first map in the pack, which is Desert Bara, I can just paste that in, and so it will define Desert Bara, and then when I go into the game, it should generate that. So in terms of testing the maps, the first thing we can try is the scenario editor. So let's go and go into the DC map pack. And we can see it generated the map we specified. So Desert Bara looks like this. Players have 2 sets of TSCs, one that's on the inside of this ring of trees and one that's on the outside, with gold being on the cracked terrain in the middle. So let us go and test the next map, which is African Waters. So we'll do that, and let's see what happens next. So if you're familiar with the map African Waters, we should be able to tell that this is not really representative of what it looks like at all. And the reason it's generating in such a buggy way is because of a bug with the scenario editor. So basically, the last map we looked at, which was Desert Bara, was a direct placement map. And then when you're working with the scenario editor, anytime you generate a direct placement map, all of the random placement generations after that will be bugged until you restart the game. So for that reason, our random placement maps are not going to work properly in the scenario editor. And that's just one of those annoying things that comes with the definitive edition. So let us go out of the scenario editor and go to a standard game instead. With the DC map pack, and we'll change it to 3 players and all visible, and this should be able to generate properly for us. So now this is a properly generating map. And then also what's useful with the debug mode is that we can just keep going. We can define next map, which is Alpine, and we can just press restart instead of having to go through and set up another standard game. So that's what the debug mode is useful for. So we can verify that that map works, and then we can go to the next one and just say restart. And we can see this map is generating properly also. So this is just one of those ways where we can get around that little bug in the scenario editor so we can verify that our maps are working properly. And of course, after we have gone through and verified that all our maps are working properly, we can, of course, get rid of the definition of debug mode so it won't pick the same map every time. It'll allow the pack to choose randomly from our list. And then once we have made sure that all our maps are generating as intended, we can copy the map script over into the map pack editor here. And then all of the changes that we made in the overall map script can be transferred to the individual map files by clicking the Update Individual Maps button in the map pack manager. So just to recap, if you're ever working on a project that's fairly complex, or if you're just basically new to RM scripting and you're not super familiar with all the rules of RM scripting, then this RMS check extension for Visual Studio Code is going to be a super helpful way to help find problems. And if you ever need to manage, modify multiple maps within a map pack, the Madlands Map Pack Manager has tools that can make that process much more straightforward. So I think that's about all I wanted to cover in this video. So as always, thanks for watching, and I hope you've learned something.